Welcome to the Art of Adventure podcast. I'm your host, Mac Tegg. I'm an illustrator, and I created this podcast to get to know other artists who are creating fantasy and sci-fi artwork. Joining me today is Kii of Kiki on ArtStation. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Your artwork is mind-blowing, so as soon as I saw it,
Gosh.
I had to have you on the show.
You're making me blush.
First, let me ask you, how old are you, and when did you first become interested in the fantasy genre?
Well, I am 33, which in internet years makes me a certified dinosaur, and in the art world, very young, so it's a very weird place to be. I actually can't really remember a time I didn't like fantasy. I grew up in the 90s, and fantasy was really aggressively marketed, and the first movie I can ever remember watching was The Last Unicorn. And that made me love unicorns. I was nuts about them, and there are some girls who have a horse phase, and I had a unicorn phase.
Nice.
And so there was that, but I also really was into manga and anime. So I love shows like Magic Knight Rarearth and Escaflowne, and they all had their own settings and their own styles. And that's what really, I guess, drew me to fantasy art. Everyone had this long, amazing princess hair that was impossible to realistically manage, and everyone had really careful attention to costuming. And if you're familiar with my work, you're probably going, oh yeah, this makes total sense. This makes total sense where Kii started.
Definitely.
But I didn't even play Dungeons and Dragons or anything until I was a teenager. I played a lot of JRPGs and Final Fantasy games like that. My first tabletop RPG was actually Vampire the Masquerade. And I didn't start playing Dungeons and Dragons until 3.5 was out.
Okay.
So I haven't really been into tabletop RPGs since about, I'd say 2004.
Okay, nice. Probably around when I got started as well. How long have you been doing artwork in general?
I've been making art since I could hold a crayon. It's what I've always been interested in. My parents probably thought it was a phase, but then I never really grew out of it. And so I've always been drawing, and I started to think about it seriously as a career when I was in high school,
Nice.
much to my parents' disappointment.
Who encouraged you to pursue art?
My parents didn't discourage me, but the vibe was always, we see you really like this, okay, but how are you going to house and clothe and feed yourself? They bought me art supplies, and they bought me my first tablet, but the biggest thing was that they bought me my first computer, and that introduced me to online art communities. And so I was there on DeviantArt, I was there on Elfwood, I just aged myself, Oakake, Paint Chat, and I was on there all summer, and it was pretty incredible because instead of being the art friend, everyone was the art friend.
Oh, yeah.
One summer I got everyone in Paint Chat into Iron Chef, and I got a drawing of Chen Kenichi for my birthday. And that just felt incredibly special to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. How would you describe your art style for our listeners out there who may not be familiar with your work?
I would say it's a semi-realistic fantasy style. It's very painterly, it's very soft, and my full illustrations, I would say, are kind of dreamlike. I've always liked surreal, sort of dreamy, fae qualities about art, and I think that sticks with most everything that I make.
Yeah, I can see that. What inspired your style? I guess you mentioned manga and anime. Are you pulling from anywhere else?
The art school answer is that James Jean, Sargent, and Leyendecker are all pretty big touchstones for me. Sargent for the really heavy strokes. It's very loose. He lets the strokes kind of build up naturally. There's not too much blending. And then James Jean, he worked on Fables for a long time, the comic book, but I like his later stuff a lot because it's very surreal. It's very dreamy, and he uses a lot of like graphic strokes as well, mixed in with his painterly style. Um, and I think if you look at like the backgrounds of my art, especially, I try to incorporate more graphic elements mixed in with like the soft painty stuff to kind of break it up.
Do you pull from any other forms of media besides just visual art?
Um, well, a few years ago, I really got into historical costuming. I was one of the steampunk people. And we went to conventions, and I would do designs for a whole group. We'd have a big group costume. And I got really into costume research and like looking at historical garments and like high fashion stuff, and that never really left me. And so I really curate like a feed of like runway, historical fashion, and then for fantasy especially, looking like knowing like armor types, armor periods, and armor like I guess trying to mix in different cultures other than just European, because that can get pretty stale.
Yeah.
So I'm always researching, would guess, and that makes its way into a lot of my work.
Nice.
Like a lot of designs will have like traditional like Mongolian elements and things like that, or like traditional Hanfu color palettes, and I don't know, I think it's really fun. I guess that might be boring for a lot of people, but I enjoy the research aspects.
Well, I mean, I really appreciate the stuff you're doing because I mean, there's so much just, white male European history, I guess, in fantasy art, and you're really trying
Yeah,
to
it can
step
get
away
pretty
from that.
stale.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. I love seeing, women and people of color represented in the fantasy genre because it's a point of view that we don't get to see very often. So thanks.
Well, you're welcome. It's important to me that people, I guess, feel seen when they look at fantasy art and they can like imagine themselves as that character or even close to that character. I don't know if, just a typical it's human man and he has a glowing sword appeals to a huge amount of people. And the fantasy genre audience is expanding all the time, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
The amount of people that even play D&D today would have blown my mind when I first started playing.
Yeah.
Like no one even knew what it was. And now I can't, everyone's like, oh, I just started playing D&D. Let me tell you about my character. And I'm like, I would have loved to have started out in tabletop with this amount of enthusiasm. Right. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible how the negativity of the whole pandemic has really helped the TTRPG community in a way that wouldn't have happened naturally for like probably another 5 or 10 years at least. It's very exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot of small creators, and it's really, I don't know. I've never, I guess, existed in the space when there's so many people looking to actually create stuff for tabletop RPGs rather than just consume and play.
What was kind of the first indicator to you that you could have a career in being an artist, especially for the fantasy community?
I guess it's when people started asking me if I did commissions, and I was posting pretty much only my characters I played for tabletop RPGs at the time on DeviantArt. I was probably playing Vampire the Requiem. I was probably playing some form of Dungeons and Dragons, and people just asked me if I would draw their characters for money. I was like, oh, sure. And I charged way too little. But eventually I realized that people kept coming back.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, this might be a good alternative to retail.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I didn't go full-time until I was out of school. And so I didn't start freelancing full-time until around 2012.
I see. What is a project that you've worked on that you were extremely excited about?
Very recently, I did the cover for Venture Maidens. by TC Gaming. It started as an actual play podcast, and now they have their own campaign setting from all of the work that they've done over the years. And I was just going through Twitter, and I saw someone lamenting. They're like, "Is there an artist that is available for commissions that actually answers their email?" And I just sent off a tweet. I do this, I don't know, I probably do this 3 times a day. I didn't expect anything from it, but I talked to Celeste, and she was like, "We're really huge fans. We want you to do these 3 Sisters of Fate for the cover." And it's supposed to be kind of spooky, kind of dreamlike. And I was like, yes, finally. This is totally my jam. And it was a great experience. We worked together really well. They had great feedback, and it was the tightest deadline I've ever had, but it was wonderful, and I look forward to doing more stuff with Venture Maidens.
Nice. Did you go to school for art at all?
Yes, but I did not go to art school. I was actually rejected from every art school I ever applied to.
Wow.
And I applied multiple times.
Dang.
It was pretty disheartening, being the person in high school sending out all your college applications and then getting no acceptance letters. So I went to community college for 3 years, and I was working retail the whole time. And then I finally got accepted into the University of Washington, which is just my state public school. And I did their fine arts program, painting and drawing, and so there was no digital art. Everything was oils and charcoal, and that's basically my art education background was completely fine arts, which I think was actually a great thing for me. I think the structure of a learning environment like that really helped me. I was really stubborn in the beginning. I don't think I realized how much I had to learn until I realized I was the worst person in my art class. Like, I went from being the best artist in my school to the worst person in my class, and it was a very humbling experience. And I was like, I can kind of see why I wasn't accepted to art school. But I learned a lot. I know the professors there, and it didn't cost me $51,000 a year to go there.
Yeah.
Which is what it costs to go to RISD now, and I'm a little shocked. It's so expensive.
Yeah.
So I did get a formal art education background, but I work almost entirely digital now.
Nice. Yeah, I can definitely see the traditional techniques creeping in on your artwork.
Oh yeah, I use 2 layers.
Oh wow.
It's all very simple.
It certainly doesn't look that way. Is anyone else in your family artistic?
Not really in the same way. My grandmother did a lot of knitting, and my grandfather did woodworking, but no one was into painting or the fine arts or anything.
I see.
My dad can draw a stick figure, and he's really proud of that.
Are you working on anything exciting at the moment that you can talk about?
Yeah, I have NDAs, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But there's a project I do when I'm not doing private commissions, and that's I like to do atypical fantasy characters or less seen, and I do them as stock art so that they're very accessible for small creators. I only have 2 packs right now. It's kind of slow going because I can only do it in my free time.
Yeah.
But I did one of 4 different elves, and then I have some more modern looking tieflings. But the elves are they have deep skin tone, they have curly hair, they have armor that's not boob plate. One has a prosthetic leg. Just stuff that you don't see very often.
Yeah.
And art that I think a lot of smaller creators couldn't afford to commission me for. I've been trying to, like I said, make these characters more accessible for people to use, so maybe they won't be so unusual, I guess, one day.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have a half-orc pack that I'm trying to work on, and it's there's a diplomat, There's a half-orc wizard, just half-orcs that they're not like, half-orc barbarian, things that you always see. I'd like to see them in like, something new, something fresh.
That's really cool. I like that idea. So, can you talk a little bit about the tools and techniques that you use to create your artwork?
Yes. I always start with research nowadays. I always gather references. If I don't really know where to start, I have a whole bunch of stock pose packs that I've bought from like Howard Leon. He photographs dancers and just really wonderful lighting. And it's pretty cheap. I think it was only like $16, but there's like, I don't know, 800 poses or so that for each of these packs. And I'll choose one. I like the dancers because they have a lot of movement and flexibility. And after so many characters, you get really tired of just drawing them standing there. And so I'll start there. And then if I'm doing a costume design, I'll go and I'll kind of like feel out my references, feel out like what's kind of trending and like what kind of textures I want or colors. If I want to work in a certain armor style or a certain cultural influence. And then I'll actually start drawing. I use Clip Studio Paints, and I find it pretty much does everything that I need an art program to do. I use one brush pretty much for painting mostly, and then I have a bunch of, this year I got a bunch of texture brushes because Clip Studio updated it and now it can use Photoshop files.
Nice.
And so I feel kind of like a little kid, like using all these texture brushes and like not really knowing how to properly use them, just kind of throwing stuff down and seeing what looks cool. It probably takes me about 5 hours to do a portrait if everything goes well, and then maybe like 8 to 15 for like a full character or like a costume design set, or a lot longer if I'm having a bad week.
Man, so it seems like you work pretty fast, actually.
Yes, I've got drawing faces down to a very good workflow.
Nice. Do you have tutorials or anything online?
I have some very old tutorials floating around on my Tumblr. And I have a YouTube channel where I've uploaded just like not really speed paints, they're just painting process videos that I've sped up to a reasonable length. But every time someone asks me how do you paint, I feel like I disappoint them greatly because I don't have any like tips or tricks. I'm like, get a really good reference and pay attention to your color temperature and the strength of your strokes, and you want to just watch this video and maybe that'll answer it better than I could.
How did you come across Clip Studio Paint?
I had been using Open Canvas for way too long, for like a decade, and it was clear to me that I needed something else, but I hated the Photoshop. I hate the UI. It's just completely unintuitive to me. I need something easy. I don't have an iPad. I can't use Procreate. But I saw Clip Studio like come up on, it might have been Steam or like Humble Bundle or something. It goes on sale all the time. And so I was like, well, I tried the new Open Canvas and I hated it. Maybe I'll try the trial for this. And I was like, oh, this is really easy. I don't have to think about using the tools here. I think I'm going to get this. And it was only $25.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty incredible. And they're adding new features all the time. I'm not shilling for Clip Studio, but I just think it's a great Adobe alternative.
Earlier, you mentioned playing games like Final Fantasy. What other like video games inspired you?
The thing is, I can't play a lot of video games. I get I guess motion sensitivity, and I get triggered migraines pretty often from first-person view or if someone has too much camera head bob, or if there's like a fisheye lens, or all three, like BioShock. But I've always enjoyed JRPGs. I guess I really like games with a very distinct art direction. Games like Journey, games like Spiritfarer come to mind. But as a teenager, JRPGs were huge. I also played a lot of older games. I had a Super Nintendo emulator. And I played like Chrono Trigger. I played, this summer I just finished Suikoden 1 and 2, which the art is not for everyone, but I find it extremely charming in that like kind of like sepia early 2000s way. I actually think a lot of games from the PlayStation 1 era have a really interesting art style. It's still hand drawn, but it's kind of like translated through a computer. And there's always that struggle not to make it look too, I guess, too slick. I guess a lot of games are focused on realism, and that's kind of where the art direction stops and dies. And so the games that go beyond that are the ones that really get me. I'm trying to think of the games that I'm playing right now. I'm playing Narita Boy, which I never thought I would play. It's a Metroidvania game, and I'm not very good at those. But the art direction is amazing. It's like a CRT, like the retro pixel graphics, but interpreted through a dream. And so there's like these giant chunky monsters that have giant CRT heads. And everything has this like neon like glow fade. It's extremely cool.
Nice.
And I think those are the types of games that get me the most. The ones that feel like the setting is real and the characters exist in this world and they chose to look the way they do. So I don't play a lot of shooters or MMOs because I feel like a lot of those games kind of lose that in favor of, I guess, tight gameplay. So I guess some style over substance in some ways.
So when you're creating your original characters, do you work within a world that you've built in your head, or do you kind of pull more from external sources?
When I make like a character for a tabletop RPG, I try to stick within the setting. Currently, the one that I have is part of an original setting that I got to kind of work with. So I got to feed in like different like cultural influences, I guess, and we've built upon that. But if someone just comes to me and they're like, I have a character for Faerun, and can you make me a character design? I'll try and get a sense of the character's like personality, their background, and what they kind of, I guess, their preferences to sort of like build a design that this character would choose to wear and reflects, I guess, their surroundings. So if someone came to me with, I'll use this as an example. They had a half-orc, I guess, barbarian, but they're kind of a wanderer type. And they said that in their game, this barbarian's like culture is kind of like inspired by the Silk Road. I'm like, okay, well, we could do something very different. And so I tried to go with traditional Mongolia and traditional Han Chinese vibes. I like used like the boots and the leather work from Mongolia, and then I kind of like mixed that in with I guess Chinese high fashion designer that's really popular right now. They're called Heaven's Gaia.
Nice.
And so I tried to mix, I guess, past and present into something that feels unique to that character.
Is there a certain type of fantasy race and or traditional fashion, I guess you could call it, that you really like drawing, or one that you don't?
I really like drawing elves. I don't know if you can tell. Not like everything in my portfolio seems to have pointy ears. But I've always liked elves. I guess they're the closest to the fae in a traditional RPG setting. I've always liked fairies. I've always been a huge fan of, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, Changeling
Oh yeah.
from Onyx Path. I played a lot of Changeling. I did a lot of Changeling designs. And I think elves, they're elegant, they're beautiful, but they're also kind of spooky. And just how disconnected they can be from, I guess, everyone else since they live so long.
Oh yeah.
The fantasy race I don't enjoy drawing would be,
Could include creatures as well.
I just don't enjoy. I don't think that my style is very suited towards a very like hard, gritty, beefy sort of characters. So I always tell people like, please don't ask me to draw Gimli. I'm not. He's gonna have soft, sensitive eyes. It's gonna look really weird. I'm just not the person that you should go to draw Gimli or your really gritty beef McHardchunk character. I could do it, but it might look really weird, and I'm not gonna have a great time doing it. I like really soft, really, I guess, feminine styles, and yeah, I usually try to turn people away that ask me to draw stuff like that. I don't think I have a creature that I don't enjoy drawing. Maybe, I wish I was better at drawing dragons.
Same.
I had a dragonborn character, and I suffered for a while trying to just draw them consistently. And I'm like, oh man, dragons are difficult, and I don't know which direction to go. Because you can't just reference a dragon.
Exactly. Yeah.
You can reference different kinds of lizards, but it's going to end up looking like a cute gecko instead of a dragon if you reference too hard.
Or you're just looking at somebody else's artwork.
Yeah, I don't want to just, copy some better artist's dragon drawing. I want to do it myself.
When you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was in the second grade, I wanted to be a paleontologist because Jurassic Park had just come out. And it was the thing every kid loved. I also loved dinosaurs. I thought they were incredibly cool, like every kid who saw Jurassic Park. But after that, I think I wanted to be a doctor because my parents, were really happy to hear me say that. And then I became a teenager and I said, I want to be a character design for Squaresoft. That's what I want to do. It doesn't matter that I can't speak Japanese or that I have no experience. That's my ultimate career goal, is to draw as many belts on one character as possible. just like these characters right here. And I probably said that for an embarrassing amount of time. It wasn't until I think college that I really decided that I could do fantasy illustration and that people needed illustration for their source books and their book covers and things like that. I don't think I really understood the tabletop industry when I first got in and what they actually need. I actually sent my portfolio to Wizards of the Coast a very long time ago, and I'm embarrassed thinking about it now, thinking about where my skill level was. But I got a reply from the art director at the time, and he was very kind and very patient. And I haven't had the gusto to send my portfolio in ever since.
I mean, I think you're extremely talented, and the work you're putting out is definitely, worthy of being published. So I don't think you should feel so sheepish about such a thing.
Oh, thank you. I look at the Magic the Gathering cards, and I'm like, boy, that's a whole background they've done, isn't it? And I don't have anything like that in my portfolio because obviously characters and faces are the things I love to paint the most. And when you freelance, you tend to accumulate, unless you work on a personal project, that's what goes into your portfolio, and you get in this catch-22 of, well, I should have more backgrounds and more full illustrations, but gosh, that's not what's paying my bills right now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd like to give you an opportunity to plug any artists or otherwise that you think people should be following.
If you are not following Nephelomancer, you should. If you like extremely surreal, dreamlike artwork, all of their stuff, I think it's they, them. First, they're great with costuming. Second, all of their work looks like it came from a very clear dream, and it has that really like kind of, I don't want to keep saying spooky, but it's like spooky and beautiful. Just surreal imagery like a black pyramid rising out of the sea, or an antler like with wonderful subsurface scattering like in a pool in sunlight. I would highly recommend following them. I actually follow a lot of environmental artists. Even though I'm a character artist, I think I like consuming environment art a little bit more. Her name is Annie Rochier. She goes by Annie-R. And I've been following her work for a long time. I don't think she knows who I am, but she used to draw in Oakaki these Silent Hill scenes, and she's sort of grown into a beautiful fantasy landscape artist with just beautifully crisp textures. It's sort of, I guess it's sort of like Studio Ghibli in that like, kind of like really vibrant, really lush environments, and it's all hand-drawn, and it's extremely beautiful, and I would highly encourage you to check her out. I think everyone probably knows who Claire Hummel is, but she's been one of my favorite artists for a very long time. I think everyone knows her from the historical Disney princesses, but she also does, I think she's the art director for Valve right now. Yeah. But she did the design for young Elizabeth in BioShock Infinite, and she just went through so much care, like researching the 1910s period, researching what girls, wore to school, basically. And all of her art has that really careful attention to detail. She's also done my favorite Adventure Zone fan art. If you're a fan of the Adventure Zone, she did this wonderful piece of the 11th Hour when they're in refuge, and everyone has, the fantasy jorts and the skirt, and Stephen the Goldfish, and the Extreme Team Bible. And if you like really particular expressive characters, or you really like rocks, she's really great at painting landscapes too. I would highly recommend that you check out Claire Hummel, or I think her handle is still Shumla.
Where can people find you? I guess I already talked about it, but go ahead and
you can find me on Twitter at Kii-chan. I made it in 2008, and that's the Twitter handle I got. You can find me on ArtStation at Kikibi. You can find me at Ko-fi at Kikibi. That's where I do all my private commission work. And you can find my stock art on DriveThruRPG under Kii W. I only have 2 packs right now, but they are, once you buy them, they're yours to do what you want. That was the idea for the stock art. So I guess you can keep looking back there. I'll probably announce on my Twitter whenever I have a new pack, when I get the time. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
All right, great. Just want to thank you again for joining us, or me, today.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope half of what I said was usable.
Oh yeah, I had a great time. So yeah, thanks again. See you around.
Thank you very much. Bye.
If you'd like to follow the show on social media, check out theartofadventurecast.com. And if you'd like to see some of my artwork, check out macteg.com. This has been the Art of Adventure podcast. Thank you for listening.